to the second in our fall semester research talk series. We are delighted today to have Dr. Xinning Gui with us. She's in human-computer interaction field. She received her PhD in information sciences and computer information sciences at UC Irvine in 2019. And she's an expert in the area of health informatics, as well as computer-supported cooperative work, among other things. So take it away.
Thank you for the nice introduction, Colleen. So, to be honest, I'm quite nervous, so don't judge me. I'm your colleague and your instructor, right? So, okay. I prepared a lot of notes, but it turns out I don't have notes to use right now because of technical issues, so just a freestyle. Okay, so thanks everyone for coming to my talk. My name is Xinning, and in today's talk, I will talk about one main project that my student Yueyu and I have been working on. Which is about exploring and enhancing transparency and explainability of consumer-facing health technology. Okay, so the main goal is to use human-centered design principle and process to explore how to make consumer-facing technology more kind of transparent and accountable and safer. Okay, so by consumer-facing health technology, I mean those type of health technology are not designed for clinicians or other kind of health professionals. Instead, they are intended for lay users such as patients, caregivers, and healthy individuals in their everyday life. So this kind of consumer-facing health technology have been increasingly popular, ranging from some simple ones, which you can track your, for instance, stress level, blood sugar, and even footstep and so on, but also to those complex ones, which are more like a telehealth system in some way, such as our folks symptom tracker. So symptom tracker is an increasing popular type of consumer-facing health technology. It asks you questions, it has conversation with you, ask you to provide your symptoms and other related information, and then it will give you possible diagnosis and self-triage advice. For instance, they may tell you, oh, this is an urgent issue, you should seek medical attention immediately, something like that. I'll give you some concrete examples later on. So there have been a lot of symptom checks on the market, not just in the United States, but also in many other countries, including like China and so on. So the developers of these symptom checkers and also even healthcare agencies or institutions, they promoted them. And they claimed that those kind of apps have a lot of benefits, such as providing quality diagnosis and triage recommendations, and thus reduce unnecessary visits, and also reduce the burdens on physicians and other healthcare professionals. I'll give you one example. So this is an advertisement video published by Ada. Ada is one of the most popular symptom checkers. So I'm gonna play the video to give you kind of a sense about what
I tell Ada instead of freaking myself out by searching online.
I don't think the voice
my father appears to be a bit disoriented. I tell Ada to find out if I need to go and see my doctor.
Because it starts out with some basic
I think maybe because when I share it, I need to wait.
Yeah, it's too low. We can definitely hear it, but it's
Oh,
too low.
I think now it's fine.
Is the speaker up all the way?
Tell Ada instead of freaking myself out by searching online.
I tell Ada when my father
I
appears
don't
to be
think
a bit
that speaker is
disoriented.
working.
I tell Ada to find out if I need to go and see my doctor.
because it starts out with some basic personal information, and then based on the symptoms that you enter, the questions grow from very general to very specific.
Ada listened to me and told me.
Is there volume on this thing?
Not that part.
Okay.
Should we try again?
Yeah, let's try it again.
We need to play present view. Yeah, and then click that, see whether it works.
I tell Ada instead of freaking myself out by searching online.
I tell Ada when my father appears to be a bit disoriented.
I tell Ada to find out if I need to go and see my doctor.
Because it starts out with some basic personal information, and then based on the symptoms
I
that
think-
you enter, the questions grow from very general to very specific.
Ada listened to me and told me where I could get help.
Ada said that my symptoms can probably be managed at home.
Ada asked if I wanted to track symptoms so I can understand how they evolve
I
over
just have to
time.
leave it like that.
It's good to know that it's something I can trust.
I feel safe and I'm sure that she will never judge me.
Yeah, and it calms me down.
I tell Ada.
I tell Ada.
I tell Ada.
I
Tell Ada.
Ada's always there for me.
So basically, sorry if you cannot hear it clearly. Basically, those people are talking about the benefits of using Ada. For instance, they feel less stigmatized if they talk to the chatbot. So because most of symptom checks are chatbot instead of a real doctor or some other kind of healthcare professionals. And they also talk about their save their cost and give them assurance and so on. Okay, and with the ChatGPT passing the medical license exam in the United States, and a lot of people started advocating for kind of using ChatGPT as a symptom checker. And in reality, there have been quite a few symptom checker developed based on ChatGPT already, and a lot of people are using them, including myself. Okay, I tried it. So then it seems like it's a very rosy picture. Oh, there are so many potential benefits, but actually there are a lot of challenges and research gaps that need to be addressed as well, right? So the first one is that there's no sufficient regulation over these kind of applications in many countries, including the UK and in the United States. So these apps are just put on the market very fast. If you imagine like ChatGPT 4 only happened like earlier this year, but now there have been some symptom checkers developed already based on that and for people to use. And then the second concern is that the large push from the government agencies and also health providers can kind of dissuade users from having sufficient caution against using that, right? So or making better informed decisions. For instance, one popular symptom checker, Babylon, actually had multiple year-long contract with NHS in the UK, which is the National Health Department. And then it still has a 10-year contract with other countries like Rwanda. And also like Sutter Health in the California, the health system actually collaborate with Ada and encourage their patient to use Ada first before coming to the hospital. So this can, in some aspects, you may think, okay, it can reduce unnecessary visits and save costs, not just for patients, but also for hospitals themselves. But it can really kind of mislead users in some way, and maybe may lead to like a blind trust, right? And the third one is that we reviewed existing symptom checkers on the market, including their features and so on, and we found that there's limited transparency and then accountability as well. So if you don't have enough information about them, like their database, their knowledge base, how they come up those recommendations, then you cannot hold them accountable, right? So this is also a critical issue. And there has been some research evaluating the accuracy of them as well. And it turns out they could misdiagnose. For instance, they could misdiagnose a heart attack as panic attack. That can really, really cause severe clinical issue, and this really happened. And in my own case, so last month I had dry cough for over 1 month. I'm still having that. So then I use ChatGPT because I want to try. It's more like an ethnographical approach. So I asked the question and I input my symptom, and then ChatGPT told me, it's highly likely you are having lung cancer. I was like, really? But then I was really scared. And then during that night, my husband and I were watching TV shows, and at that time Netflix popped up Breaking Bad. That's one of my favorite shows. I was like, oh, maybe we should rewatch it. And then the first episode is that, you know, he was diagnosed with lung cancer. So I literally cried. I was like, oh my God, I'm having lung cancer as well. So then I went hospital. I asked the doctor to do a lot of tests on me, like chest X-ray and so on. It cost me a lot of money, but then it's just asthma. So you can see that it's not necessarily, you know, I would say, yes, there are potential benefits there, but there are also concerns and issues that we should pay attention to, right? So to partially address some of the challenges and concerns, my student Yu and I have conducted 2 research strands on this. The first strand is to conduct exploratory research on how people actually use symptom checks in their everyday life. And the second is to use design and experimental methods to explore how to actually make symptom checks more transparent and explainable. So the first research strand had produced 3 papers in CHI, 2 in CHI, and 1 in EMEA. So we actually conducted 3 different studies, and we use a wide range of methods, such as app feature analysis. It's a very systematic approach to review what features they have and so on. And then app review analysis, and we also interviewed with more than 60 users. So we actually found a lot of interesting findings into this talk. I will just focus on some of them. So the first one is about medical authority, like how symptom checkers, especially nowadays, they are powered by AI and machine learning and so on. So how those kind of technologies actually shape people's perception of who is the medical authority. So traditionally, when we visit a doctor, we ascribe the medical authority to the doctors, right? So, and their communication skill, their like reputation, their online reviews and so on, they all shape how we perceive them, whether they are authoritative enough and so on, right? But then during our interview, we found that a lot of users also ascribe certain degree of medical authority to symptom checkers. And here, medical authority refers to the power distributed in the whole healthcare social technical system involving all stakeholders, such as traditional authorities like healthcare providers, and also those novel health technologies like symptom checkers. So in the real world, so how a healthcare consumer perceive the medical authority can really impact their decision-making and who's suggesting they value more and so on. So we think it's a very important issue to investigate. And we found that those AI-based symptom checkers significantly impact their perception of medical authority in their everyday practice. So I will just be brief. So here are just 3 examples. So the first one is about how medical authority is a relational concept. It's a dynamic concept. So we found that when users evaluate whether they should trust symptom checkers, they actually put that, contextualize that within a large network of technologies and people and so on. So for instance, in this code, so because of this apps they mentioned, symptom checker apps mentioned were developed by those big reputable companies, then those participants were like, oh, they are trustworthy. And a lot of people, they use them and just follow the advice not to seek medical attention or seek medical attention timely and so on. And we also found that they compare symptom checkers diagnostic procedure against their perceived standard diagnostic procedures in offline healthcare practices. And then they evaluate whether they should trust a single symptom check or trust a human doctor more. So there are a lot of relevant quotes, but in this one, basically the participant found that the app that he used didn't ask for blood test results. So he's like, well, so without this test, it's impossible to perform a good diagnosis. And they also kind of pay attention to the conversation, like how usually human doctor probe those clinical questions and how symptom checkers do so and so on. So it's a very relational kind of medical authority concept. And they also compare the results against human doctors and also other symptom checkers and also online health community peers responses and even like just a single simple Google search and so on. And they also pay attention to where the knowledge base, the data the app use are coming from. And they would like to see more kind of information regarding that because we found that some participants, they don't just rely on symptom checker. Instead, they treat it as a tool to kind of inform their decision-making and also enhance their conversation with their offline doctors and also kind of enhance their capacity to have a shared decision-making with their doctor, right? But then without certain information, they find it's impossible to kind of meaningfully achieve that purpose. So for instance, here, the participant side, the app should disclose some information appropriately, such as how many hospitals and medical records that these apps used and so on to build its knowledge base. And of course, the interaction design of symptom checks also impact their kind of perceived authority. So they talk about language style should be more serious, but at the same time should be also empathetic. And some people feel that AI-based symptom checkers are better than human doctors, but human doctors oftentimes want to rush you out, right, within 10 minutes. But chatbot doesn't do so, right? So they actually pay attention to a lot of aspects of interaction design. So the takeaway message here is that there's an ecosystem view of medical authority with the rise of consumer-facing health technology. So they don't singly rely on symptom checker. They also don't just singly rely on human doctors. They put all these things together and to kind of compare and cross-validate and so on. And we saw a lot of like positive comments on symptom checkers, and ChatGPT were like, oh, they will replace human doctors and so on. But based on our study, we think a more kind of reasonable and safer role for this kind of tool is to supplement clinical visits. So for instance, so there's advocacy for patient-centered care, shared decision-making, and the patient empowerment and so on. And we feel that based on our interviews with existing users, this kind of technology can empower them to some degree to help them understanding their conditions better so that they can have meaningful conversation with their doctors and so on. But of course, we also saw some concerning phenomena, like some people did follow the symptom checker advice and then may encounter some kind of negative clinical consequences. And one consistent theme is that they desire transparency. So this is related to explainability, but I want to emphasize that in my research, I frame explanation probably in a different way. It's not just about how the system work inside, like from as algorithmic or mathematical perspective, but it's also about what kind of information and explanation you provide for users to meaningfully interact with system. Oftentimes, they don't care about the algorithms, like how algorithms work. And they are oftentimes lay people, they don't understand algorithm and they don't care, but they just want to have some actionable insights. So based on these findings, we conducted a follow-up study and we extracted some key transparency needs. So first, we found that a lot of users were confused by the probing questions, like, oh, why this symptom checker is asking this question, or why the symptom checker asks these questions in this particular order. And then second, they also did their information to kind of help them understand the recommendations from symptom checkers, such as, oh, you said I am having a lung cancer, then how did you come to that conclusion, right? What kind of symptoms that I input actually lead you to think I'm having lung cancer, right? At least the ChatGPT didn't give me that answer, so that really stressed me out. So the third one is that users also did their information about the knowledge base, and also like whether there are like some other people who having similar symptoms were really eventually diagnosis with that recommendation and so on. So based on these empirical findings, I will skip these slides due to, time constraints, since I already explained them. So then we extract a set of data implications. So the first one is that we should provide explanations during the conversation and interaction to explain why certain questions are asked and why they asked in certain order. And then the second data implication that we should provide an explanation regarding which user inputs leads to the medical recommendations and how. By how, I'm not talking about the algorithm though. And then the third one is that users need to have kind of information about who received the same clinical recommendation with the same symptoms and so on. Kind of like the prevalence of similar kind of patients and so on. So based on those data implications, we follow the human-centered design process. That means we get empirical findings about the users' real-world use of the technology, and then we design the prototype to test the design implications. So that comes to the second research strand. So this has been published in Tokai and Kai. So we are trying to explore the ways to actually make symptom checkers transparent and explainable from users' perspectives. So the first part is regarding what to explain. So to test that, we already had some preliminary empirical kind of understanding, as I mentioned. So we replicate the CDC's COVID self-checker with a chatbot user interface. And in our replica, we added 3 types of explanations, which I will show later. And then we conduct experiments and also post-experiment introduced with 20 participants. So what to explain? So this is a kind of the UI of the prototype we designed. We follow the typical kind of chatbot-based symptom checkers conversational user interface to design the prototype. So basically, user can input and also input their symptoms, and also they can quickly respond by selecting some kind of predefined options and so on. And then the chatbot will give them answers regarding whether they are having COVID or not. So I'm going to play a video again. I hope this, I don't know. This is a teaser video we So yeah, those are screenshots. The first one is rationale based. So talking about why the symptom checker actually asks certain questions and why in particular order. And the second one is about why we give that recommendation based on what input. And the third one is that also where's the information source, so based on CDC's guidance. And some other kind of information related to who have similar symptoms actually have COVID and so on. So then we conducted with the subject experiment with 4 conditions. One baseline, which is the CDC's kind of original version, and then combined with CUI, conversational user interface. And then the other 3 are these conditions. And we also extract a lot of like existing measurements on explainable AI and also SUS and so on, and also NASA TLAX and so on to test. And then we also have poster study follow-up semi-structured interview. So simple answer is that explanation are helpful. So they could improve the perceived diagnostic quality and also facilitate their medical decision making and improve their trust in the diagnosis and enhance the transparency overall. And more interestingly, they also talk about how the explanations actually increase their health knowledge and awareness and facilitate their learning about COVID. And also contribute to user experience overall. But we also found some kind of in-depth insights. So so let's talk about maybe the third one. So the third one is that we found that explanations should not be static or one size fits all. I read some interactive machine learning literature. I think people also in their field also recognize this. But in reality, it's a little bit harder to implement because like in HCI, we talk about user perspective and but we don't really translate that into algorithms, right? So that's why I also just a side note, that's why like our college, we have both group of people to kind of collectively solve some problem together. So, and we found that some people feel some explanations are kind of like information overload because they are not curious about that at all. But for some people, they feel, oh, this is so helpful, right? So, and also we kind of discussed like broader social implications for providing explanation to the users. And one key point, which is also my current research interest, is that how medically underserved populations actually could enjoy the benefits safely, right? Even like when we provide explanations for people who have limited access to follow-up care offline, then that's not really so helpful. And for people who have limited health literacy, then how we can design those kind of explanations which are accessible to them, right? So those are just like a broader social kind of implications that we need to think about. So then we also do another study on when to explain. This is actually based on the finding that explanations should not be static or one size fits all. So we conducted a follow-up study. We developed a chatbot-based symptom checker prototype with 4 conditions. And then we do experiments and post experiments again with 34 participants. But in this case, it's not COVID folks. And the 4 conditions are also different from the previous one because we did an interview study first. We actually found 2 key design requirements that users have. One is for like explanation. The other one is for emotional support. So for instance, let's say if I'm diagnosed with as like having lung cancer by ChatGPT, I wish ChatGPT could give me some comfort, right? So that's why we designed another 4 conditions based on these 2. We have a lot of findings, but again, I would just focus on the transparency part. So to kind of give user control, we actually designed a very simple feature, which is a toggle button. That means participants and users could just open it or just close it. If they open it as a simple mode off, that means they will get those explanations and emotional kind of support during the conversation. And if they just don't select that, or if they select that, they open it, then they just go back to the baseline condition. There's no explanation, there's no emotional support. It's just like a regular common symptom checker. So the experimental procedure is quite complex, so I will encourage you to read our papers, and we have a lot of findings. But here I will just talk about the click patterns. So we have like different scenarios for users to carry out tasks. There are 3 scenarios. One is on non-emergency condition. One is on self-care condition. That means you can just self-care to cure that condition. You don't need to seek medical condition attention. The third one is actually emergency condition. And all the scenarios are validated by a family doctor. And also we compared the scenarios with the popular symptom checks like ADA and Babylon and so on to make sure that they don't mislead our participants. And each scenario includes like a user persona and also what symptoms this user persona has, and they can just follow the scenario to carry out the experimental task, the 4 conditions, 1 baseline, and the other 3 are explanation and also emotional, the third one, and then the last one is combined step. So then we actually extracted the simple mode, the toggle buttons click pattern, and we found 4 different patterns. There are 306 instances. So we analyze them and we plot some one representative example for each pattern. So the first pattern is that some participants, they kind of click the button in the middle because they were like, I just want the quick diagnosis. It's a little bit annoying to see so many, information like explanation and so on. And the second one is that some people, they would like to see explanation or emotional support or both in the beginning and also in the end. In the beginning, it's like when they just started using the symptom checker. And in the end, is after the diagnosis is provided, they would like to see those explanations and emotional support. But in the middle, like the probing stage, they don't really care about this. And then the next one is that some people, they in certain conditions, they just turn it off immediately. They don't feel that they need those information. Like the participant said, I just wanted to ask me what I have and quickly tell me what to do next. And then the last one is that most of the participants actually enjoyed the explanation and emotional support. So they didn't turn the condition back to the simple mode at all. Like this one said, I didn't feel it was necessary to use the toggle button. It's very important and essential to my personal health. So I wanted to get as much information as possible. So when to provide explanation then, so we have a lot of like interview data as well, combining with the click pattern and other kind of measurements data. So we extract some kind of insights. So here are just some examples. The first one is that we found that explanations should be kind of offered depending on like different stages. So for instance, we had 34 participants, and then 31 participants actually preferred explanation for the diagnostic results. So they would like to see why the recommendation was for instance lung cancer in my case, and how they what they should do and so on. So they would like to see more information like that. But in the middle, the now participant responses were differentiated. Some people, they appreciate the giving explanation regarding why certain questions were asked and so on. And even like medical jargons in the probing question. But some others, they just didn't feel the need and so on, okay? And we also found that there's some kind of a correlation between the emergency level of the condition, the scenario, and their perception of the necessity of explanation and emotional support. So that means we need to provide a different number and also type of explanation in different situations with different emergency levels. So for instance, here, the participant said, if you are in an emergency situation, then you want it to be direct because you don't want to have to read the whole explanation. You just want to know your disease and get better. So we also found it's very interesting that people actually associate their own perceived personalities with the click button. They were like, it's just, for instance, here, this is related to my personality. I guess every time I have to go to the doctor, if I have an issue where I don't know what's going on with me, I appreciate detailed responses very much, and I lack the explanations. But for some people, they just feel that I really would like to know the results as quick as possible, as always. So they attribute the differences to their personality. So overall, we found that it's critical to make explanation more interactive. We only tested a single toggle button, so it's just a very single kind of design, simple design, but more effort should be paid to actually make explanation more interactive and design interactive, explainable user interface for users. We also found that it's necessary to balance transparency and efficiency. So in some cases, explanation is not always good. It could be information overload. So how we can achieve kind of the balance between transparency and efficiency. And also, how can we provide personalized explanation for how we can enhance user control for explanation in different contexts. So those are all open questions that we would like to pursue. So summary, so part of this project, we actually focus on leveraging transparency and explainability to make consumer-facing health technology such as checkers more human-centered. But it's also beyond the transparency design because transparency and explainability cannot solve all the challenges, right? I think based on our findings, we also found that there really need to be regulations on these apps because these apps have been downloaded thousands of millions times in the App Store. A lot of people are using it, but there's no sufficient regulation. Instead, there are endorsements from those medical authorities. So this is really concerning. And also, this is also so it's not just about transparency, it's also about health equity. Like a lot of people, they said, oh, if people in medically underserved, areas can use this can solve a lot of problems for them. But in fact, oftentimes innovation can actually widen the health disparity because like AI-based technologies may benefit those privileged people more than those people who are underserved and have limited resources to act on AI recommendation or have limited AI literacy or health literacy to act on the information provided by such tools and so on. So I think there are much more issues which are beyond the transparency that we should, pay attention to. So this is also related to the safety that I have been kind of concerned about. So when we talk about those ChatGPT or other kind of AI-empowered real symptom checkers, we painted a very kind of positive picture for average people, but we don't kind of caution them enough. So I think that can really kind of introduce some safety concerns as well. So how we can make consumer-facing health technology safer, right? Again, this is back to the regulation, but also technology design as well. For instance, when we design explanations, how we can provide enough kind of explanation to help them understand this is just a possibility, right? So right now, for those symptom checkers, commonly, they only have a disclaimer, like, oh, this cannot substitute for medical advice, but that's only in their app description on the App Store. So I don't think that's a kind of a sufficient way to deliver that message. So here are the papers, relevant papers we published about this project. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the Q&A session, and also you can feel free to drop by my office later. Yeah. Thank you very much. And first, I want to acknowledge my student Yue who is graduating soon, and she has been leading this project. So yeah, she's a great student and she's looking for industry job. So if you know any opportunities, please forward to her. Okay. And I also would like to thank my IST colleague, Yibo Honglong. And also I would like to thank our student Ren Kai, and also my collaborator Chunhua Xiang Hua Yao Li, and also Dr. Chris Heron in Penn State House. Yeah, thank you very much.
For questions.
Ready? Well, whenever you're ready, you can just switch it on there.
Okay. Great. Questions? Okay, start right here. Tell us your name and your status.
Okay. Hi. Thank you for the presentation. Really impressive. My name is Hall. I'm a first year PhD student here at IST. So, early on, you gave some examples where the chatbots gave proper diagnosis for doctors and nurses. So I'm curious, in your research, did you come across any studies of how those misdiagnoses happen, and whether it has to do with user interactions and prompting as they interact with chatbots? Because personally, my experience is that I ask similar questions, but depending on how I phrase them or the sequence that I provide those prompting, I get different kinds of responses.
A simple answer is that as an HCI researcher, I don't believe in users. If users cannot interact with symptom checks well, which leads to misdiagnosis, that's the symptom checks problem. So a more detailed response that I haven't encountered such kind of dedicated research in why those misdiagnoses happen. But I do see a lot of research in medicine field, which ask the clinicians to give diagnosis based on the same set of patient opinions, and then compare their diagnosis against those apps. And sometimes they found the apps outperform, but sometimes they found, doctors outperform. It really depends on who are the authors in most of the cases, because some of these papers are actually published by Babylon and other app companies themselves, and also their sponsored researchers. And also some papers also focus on a particular kind of disease type, and then they also have kind of different conclusions. But based on my own research, when we reviewed those app features, I personally feel that misdiagnosis could definitely happen because of a lot of reasons. First, those symptom checks do not ask for patient history. That's a big problem, right? Because in real world, diagnosis should be made based on your past history as well, right? If you go to visit a doctor and usually doctor asking about your past kind of history, right, medical history. Second, so we found that those symptom checks, they do not tailor for diverse user groups. And in medicine field, actually, people from different race and ethnicity may have different kind of level of risk to certain disease. But the symptom checks usually don't consider that at all. And they also don't consider, for instance, we saw some participants that they are transgender, and when they input the symptom, then the symptom checks don't really cannot consider their status at all. So I think there could be a lot of issues which lead to misdiagnosis. So but mostly I think it's about their knowledge base and also their interaction design as well. So regarding interaction design, I can give you one example. So sometimes they ask the participant to describe their symptom, and then they include those medical jargons. I don't even know how to pronounce this medical jargons, sorry. So, and then they don't give guidance on what these jargons means. So one example could be, maybe the symptom check asks you whether you have a kind of a symptom in certain part of your body, but then they don't use those kind of lay language. They use a very kind of complex modern medical jargon to describe your body part. Then some of our participants were like, we don't know what they are referring to. So then this of course can lead to misdiagnosis, right? Because the chatbot wasn't getting accurate information in some cases. But is that the user's fault? I don't think so. I think that's the symptom check is being fault. I hope you answer your question. Great.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the talk. I have two questions. One of them actually piggybacking on that question about prompt engineering. There's a lot of relatively large amount of research coming out now about prompt engineering, especially for large language models or LLMs. Do you know if there is any research looking at if we take and maybe rephrase or rearrange the wordings or maybe rearrange a set of sentences, then you're going to get answers from "you're okay" to "you have a cancer"? So that's my first question. I'm going to give you two questions. The second question is about your last experiments with the default walk to the toggle. Have you looked into what happens if you change the default? So your default, I think, was the explanation default was on. So have you looked at if there is any impact of the default bias on that? There are some good research in default biases, right? So it's applied to, for instance, for people who want to donate for the, let's say, donors and the driver's license or things like that. So have you looked at if that would impact any of the behavior of the users?
Those are great questions. So in response to your first question, the prompt engineering, that's actually something I have been working on with the collaborative in Hong Kong. And we are trying to see like, if, like you said, if we reframe the prompt, will we get different answers from the chatbot? I think this is, my motivation is that I think this is related to a point that I raised before, is related to people's literacy. Not just the health literacy, but also AI literacy, right? Now that everyone knows how to have meaningful, helpful conversation with LLM, right? So I think, yeah, that's something that we have been doing research on. We just started the last month, so I don't have like a research result to share yet, but I'll keep you updated. The second question, we did consider that. So that's why we randomized the order of conditions and also the setting in our experiment. Yeah.
Okay. So I think we assumed that it was set at one default, but it's not. You randomized it.
Thanks for the talk. Quick question for you on sort of the second opinion slide that you had, where the patient used the symptom checker to confirm the existing diagnosis that the doctor. I was curious how prevalent that was in your interviews, rather than kind of the first point of contact in a triage setting, if it was actually more common to use as a confirmatory source.
Because I didn't do a larger scale survey, I probably don't have those kind of very detailed statistic results for you, but many of our participants, they use symptom checks first, and then symptom checkers may suggest them go to see a doctor, and then they later go to a doctor's office, and then they kind of compare the results. But then, as you mentioned, some people do that reversely. They go to doctor first, and then they were not sure whether they should believe in that doctor. So then they use symptom checkers. So it's, the two scenarios are both quite common. Yeah.
That's interesting. That's interesting because I think there's also the third, do you disclose to the doctor that you use the symptom checker and how much do they roll their eyeballs?
Yeah, I actually asked that question. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think they like it. I was waiting for a question from the back of the room.
Yeah,
we
always
gonna ask the question.
Thanks, Amy. It's a very interesting talk. I think one of the arguments that you made initially is the lack of, or explainability is a way to address some of the user issue, stress, anxiety, and so on. Right. But isn't explainability a double-edged sword in this case? So in other words, if it is misdiagnosis, and if I'm giving you a very detailed, very confident explanation, wouldn't that lead to more problems and user concerns and anxiety? So in other words, I think that is the way I understood it. Part of the argument here is hinged on correct explanation. But if the current systems are not being able to do diagnosis correctly, then probably explanation, just adding explanation in that case, wouldn't lead to very positive user experience. So just kind of curious what you think.
Yes, I totally agree. So, in my later research, I actually kind of broadened the scope of explanation, not just to explain how the chatbot actually arrive at that recommendation, but also to explain to them you shouldn't trust us and what's the kind of the confidence level of their recommendation and so on. So I think that can partially mitigate that, but I agree it's impossible to kind of totally mitigate the possible unintended consequences on people's kind of mental stress, right? So, but I think there's a trade-off here. So, by power explanation, we are trying to first inform decision-making instead of blind trust, right? But meanwhile, like you said, if it's a misdiagnosis or if it's a severe health condition, then it will cause stress at the same time. And by the way, the other way that we have tested is to provide emotional support. And that's really kind of something that our participants appreciate a lot. So we add emotional support from the beginning to the end, especially after the recommendation on diagnosis was provided. And we just try to use those language to comfort them and tell them it's going to be okay. All you need to do is to this answer. So I think there could be some other ways to mitigate this unintended consequences as well. But we haven't explored and tested them yet. But I totally agree with you. It's impossible to totally kind of eliminate that possible consequences. Yeah.
I have a question. Yep. And then one in the back.
Thank you, Xinning, for the talk. This was really engaging, especially with some testing. Something here is, I don't know if you consider within the factors that affect the reliability of the diagnosis and the patient, the commercial factor, the relationship of those apps with commercial providers, and what is going to happen with the information I'm providing. Is that information going to go to a health provider that is going to use it commercially? You know, we're kind of used to that in health industry, and I wonder if you consider that factor as one of the reliability factors for the trustworthiness of the diagnosis.
That's a great point. Yeah. I have some kind of diverging points related to this. The first one is that I think it's also related to the data privacy, right? So we actually analyze the privacy policies of these apps as well. It's part of my student master thesis, and we did find that there are concerns, real concerns regarding like how they are using the personal medical information that we input. Especially considering like some apps, they are using third-party cloud service to store the data. So I think that's a big issue here. And second, regarding the doctors, so I think you are right, like the Sutter Health system in California, when they adopted the ADA symptom checker and put it on their front page, it's still there, by the way. Their rationale was that it will save cost, like not just for patients, but also for themselves. So there's definitely some kind of commercial kind of relation playing a role in the endorsement. I totally agree with that. So I think this is also why I personally feel that transparency is important. I think regarding transparency, it's also necessary to disclose those kind of conflict of interest and so on, right, to the users. And then another point that may not be so relevant is that we actually started some kind of different but similar apps in China, and we found it's very interesting. So some of the symptom checkers app in China, they actually integrate follow-up services, like it will direct you to the right department of doctors to seek medical attention from. I think that's a good approach. But of course, it can have conflict of interest as well, like which hospital you are referring to, right? Which doctors you are referring to. So yeah, that's definitely a key issue that we should kind of do more research on. Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you.
That's funny because I think in this case, the state of the American medical information, protects us because there's no way they would get this integrated into. I would be shocked.
There was a question back there.
So we were talking before about I'm Krzysztof, resident here. So we were talking about anxiety and how people might potentially underestimate or overestimate their problems or hide some information. Do you think that the language model could somehow detect that? And also how to explain to a person that they didn't say things accurately?
You mean the large language model?
Yeah, could a chatbot just looking at phrasing detect that people are underestimating their symptoms?
I don't think the current symptom checkers have that function. But regarding large language model, I am actually doing a research with Dr. Luo from the UK on how people actually use ChatGPT for medical health consultation. Because those people, they believe that large language model could detect their stress and comfort them. And they even, although ChatGPT is actually very kind of reserved for that purpose, like conservative for that purpose, I think that's right? But then those users actually devise some workaround strategies, like using some weird prompts, like, oh, you should ask the ChatGPT to pretend to your grandma, and then you ask these questions. Then ChatGPT will answer that and will provide mental health suggestions. So, but we haven't tested like whether ChatGPT is really good at that, comforting people and detecting stress and that and so on. But I can tell you a lot of users are using it for that purpose already. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Hi, I'm Erica Fleming. Thank you so much. This was really interesting. My question actually kind of piggybacks off the last one a little bit. You were talking about people who really do trust that like ChatGPT or one of these checkers could potentially give them accurate medical information. Did you look at levels of trust at all when you were either talking like interviews or in any of the surveys or anything that you did? I'm curious because of these types of symptom checkers seem like an extension of what we've been looking at people like looking at WebMD for their symptoms or something like that, right? And there's this very broad range of people who believe that WebMD can tell them what's wrong versus the people who are like, it's always gonna tell me I have cancer, right? And so I was just curious to know if there's any comparison between the two, like, do we as, you know, people trust something like an AI symptom checker more than we do our own research that we could do on the internet looking for things?
That's a great question. So I didn't do a survey on this, but our interviewees did tell us that they didn't trust those internet information, but they tended to trust the AI more, because AI now is a buzzword that I think people feel like, oh, AI is fancy. So a lot of people, they actually trust AI-based symptom checkers than those Google search results. Yeah. Yeah, I think, I also want to add that for some of our participants, the motivation for using symptom checkers is not just about they trust the AI. It's oftentimes associated with a high cost of healthcare service, especially in the United States. We had people from those disadvantaged background, they couldn't afford those visits easily, so they wanted to use these free tools first. Yeah.
More questions?
Thank you for my talk. So my question is basically a chance for you to wax poetic a little bit, because I was sort of confused as to how there can be no oversight framework on this for a couple of reasons. First of all the discussion we've had is like HIPAA alarm bells blaring everywhere. Second is you see a trend in the medical community wherein physicians assistants and nurses are trying to, you know, gain the power to do more care in an effort to bring down costs, and the APA is fighting that tooth and nail. So I don't really understand how it's possible that medical advice can be given, note to passive construction here, to, you know, without having some oversight on it. And then kind of parallel to that, I was sort of curious to know what the standard issue transparency techniques they're employing are, because, you know, a lot of this seems like if they just put up a model card, people would be a lot happier with it. So thank you.
Yeah, so like FDA actually has some regulation over technology that they categorize as medical device, but unfortunately, those AI-based symptom checkers are not categorized as that. So that's why like there's no sufficient oversight on that. And should I go back?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I really want to be closer to you, but yeah. Anyway, so what did you ask? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. So I actually saw a review article on the regulatory issue on symptom checkers, and the findings were quite kind of depressing. And even like this morning, I was like, oh, let's search whether there have been new symptom checkers built upon ChatGPT, and I found a lot. And they are just publicly available on some web pages and also other places like App Store and so on. So I was quite shocked because I feel it's just been several months, but people are already kind of build these symptom checks already. So that's why like I have been thinking about policy implications of my study. So, but I don't know, I just feel it's a very kind of shocking, but complex issue for me to understand as well. So I don't understand why there's no regulatory insights either. Yeah. What's the second question, by the way?
It's about transparency. So are they using model cards or any of this standard?
Transparency model cards.
Oh, that's good.
Model
So it's a standard tool, you can put like, what data you trained on, what kind of model it is, who built it, when, it's just a one sheet.
Yeah, you mean the framework that we use in our research or the existing?
Or the symptom checker posting anything like that.
Oh,
Just like a standard issue transparency technique. That's not
we
good.
only saw, I think when we reviewed the symptom checks like 2 years ago, the features and app description, we only saw one symptom check that had those kind of diagrams to explain the algorithms. It's a very kind of complex diagram that's not discernible for lay people, and they put that in the app description. But other than that, we couldn't find any. Yeah.
Okay, that's a question.
Hi, my name is Sanjana. So thank you for the talk. It was really interesting. Kind of piggybacking off of that question and your discussion of the policy implications of your work. I mean, GPT-4 just came out pretty recently and it's already the new status quo. So my sense, anecdotally speaking, is that policy is never going to be able to keep up with AI at the rate it's developing. And so my question is you mentioned a lot of user transparency needs and expectations for these systems, and I wonder, there's a lot to say about companies having authority and these big data sets and big models having a lot more, I don't know, power in terms of being more fun to play around with maybe. But my question is, what features do you think would make a transparent, explainable, I guess instead of asking policy to shut down these very bogus chatbots that are spreading misinformation, how do you feel like we could create a chatbot that is more compelling and better addresses user needs in order to perhaps dissuade people naturally away from these fraudulent chatbots towards something that better serves their needs? Because I don't know, my intuition is that these are just kind of a means to an end and people will just try the first thing they see on the App Store. But I feel like reputability and the explicit features that relate to health related needs might be relevant. So what do you feel about that?
I think there could be many approaches to kind of partially address that. So first, I feel that so right now all the symptom checks, like I said, they only have a simple disclaimer in their app description. But I think that's not enough, right? They should have some kind of nudging kind of alert kind of information embedded in the conversation, right? More straightforward and more obvious. And second, I think it should be I'm not just criticizing it. I kind of acknowledge that it does have a lot of benefits, especially for some people. They cannot afford to see the doctors right away, or sometimes because of long appointment and waiting time, right? But I think to make it really, really helpful, there are a lot of issues to address, and there are possible ways to kind of implement that in a more kind of safe context. For instance, I think it can be a good telehealth tool if it can be connected to offline doctors. So for instance, let's say in telehealth case, if patients use the ADA to self-charge, first, I would like to see there's a follow-up from nurses or doctors to that users regarding the results they get from that. Third, I think if we reframe it from being a symptom checker to kind of a supplement tool, then one possible usage could be enhance the capacity of these kind of tools to help patients or caregivers to prepare a documentation of their symptoms and the questions they may have. Then that can enhance their interaction with human providers. Because oftentimes patient-provider interactions have a lot of issues, like they have poverty issue, right? They have different level of knowledge, and the ideal kind of goal of achieving shared decision making is so hard. But maybe such AI tools can be kind of reframed and redesigned to serve that purpose instead, to empower patients to prepare for their clinical visits instead. So I think there are a lot of things we can do. Yeah, this is just some examples I have in mind. Yeah.
Great. Once again, let's thank Xinning for a wonderful job. And thank you. This is our research talk series continues in November when we hear from Dr. Kelly Potter. And we look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you.
Thank you for your help.
Yeah, of course, I'm so sorry about
It's
the
not your
technical.
fault. I think it's because this is a new laptop, so
Okay.
I don't even know how it works.
Okay, no, you did, that's all, you did great, you did great.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was excellent.
Hi, Erica.
Actually met before. I'm Erica Fleming. I'm actually on staff.
We actually saw each other in a virtual meeting when we interviewed.
I feel like that's like a fever dream. It's like I clearly
Like
remember
several
those-
years ago.
Yeah, it was a while ago. Well, thank you for helping me. I love it here.
I'm glad to see you here.
So I'm teaching a class this semester on AI, and it's been like on the humanities side of AI, so it's been really interesting. But I actually just want to thank you. I am not a technical person at all, and I totally understood everything you presented on today, which is not always the case when I. So I just wanted to thank you. I'm sure it was super interesting for the technical people too, but it was so lovely for me to be able, like I told, like, it was great to understand. So
Oh,
thank you for sharing so
Thank
much.
you for those encouraging. Thank you. And thank you for the great questions.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It was really interesting. Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No,
it was great.
Yeah, that's probably been great. Really enjoyed it. Okay, yeah, definitely, let me know if I get one.
No,
Yeah, anyway, I thought you did a great job. Yeah. Yeah. Make it.
Time, right? Okay. I'll have you give it. And-
No, perfect, yeah. Oh, no, of course, no worries. Yeah, I'll be there in November as well.
Okay. Thank you.
No, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And then.